In episode 10, part 2 picks up where part 1 leaves off. As you recall back in part 1, after Julian won the archery competition against Miss Mackenzie, and Kero had a chat with her, only to find out that Sakura's prepared for the final judgment, whatever that means, after those dreams that she's been having lately, and what the light and dark card said back in episode 7, when the light card said that you has been with her all along. And now, also back in part 1, is that Sakura, Lee, Madison, and Kiro were about to be face to face with the final elemental card, Earth. Also, as you recall back in part 1, good news for Sakura, she rescues her best friend. But now here comes a bigger problem, that the Earth's attacks are getting closer and closer and they're getting worse and worse by the minute. Now the question for Sakura is, can she capture the Earth card? Well, that's where part 2 begins. So back with Madison, Sakura, Lee, and Carol, they were still being affected by the Earth's attacks. Now, Carol, what he says in his case, hopes that the Earth card's form can show itself soon. But the only two that aren't affected by the attacks were Julian and Miss Mackenzie. So Julian was the first to arrive on the scene. So anyway, after Madison was blown away by the Earth's attacks, luckily Julian was there. And so he asked Sakura, "Are you guys okay? Are you two hurt anywhere?" "No, we're fine," Sakura said. So back with Sakura, she's getting worried that the mysterious earthquakes are getting stronger and worse by the minute, and it's coming towards Miss Mackenzie. So Sakura, who got worried about Miss Mackenzie, she says, "Miss Mackenzie, don't panic. Just stay where you are. Just be careful, okay?" And of course, the Earth's attacks didn't affect Miss Mackenzie, at least a bit. Now, Sakura finds this really weird because the Earth's attacks are not affecting Miss Mackenzie, and she's left to wonder why. Could it be that she was UA? Now, remember back in part 1, she was wearing the exact same pink short dress, just like what Sakura was dreaming about previously. So, back with Lee, after he arrived on the scene, he told Sakura to use her magic and to do it fast. But she hesitated. In the meantime, mysterious earthquakes are wreaking havoc all over town because of the Earth's power, and it's getting stronger and stronger by the minute. Back with Lee and Sakura, he told her, "You have to use the key." But Sakura panicked and said that Julian will see her. And then he says, "Well, use the sleep card and hurry," Lee said. So finally, Sakura agrees and did what she normally does, use her key and transform it into a staff. The next thing she did was to use the sleep card to put everyone to sleep. Well, except for Miss Mackenzie, of course. So once that was finished, back with Sakura and Lee, Sakura wants to know from Kiro, can the earthquakes be stopped in any way? Well, there's only one way, Kiro says. That's if you seal the earth card itself. So Sakura, in other words, in Kiro's case, she has to come up with a plan quick. But as any person should tell you that an Earth card must have a weakness somehow. At least that's what Sakura thought in her case. So, aha, Sakura has a plan to find the Earth card's weakness. So she asked Lee a question. "I'm gonna go check things out for myself. Can you watch Madison and the others?" He nodded in agreement, and so she heads off. So Sakura uses the fly card and then tells Lee, "I'll be right back." And so she heads up in the sky to investigate. What kind of weakness does the Earth card have? That's what she was thinking to herself while she was up in the air with the fly card on her staff, of course. Also staying behind were Miss Mackenzie and Julian. And Julian's asleep at the moment. We'll get back to him later. So anyway, back with Sakura, who's up in the sky thanks to the fly card on her staff. Now Sakura's best friend Madison, who was worried and concerned. That's when Miss Mackenzie approached her and said, "Don't worry, she'll be fine." So anyway, back with Sakura and Kiro, who were up in the sky, and as you may have guessed it, when Sakura looked downtown and saw what the Earth card was doing, she was surprised and in shock. She just couldn't believe it. And then asked, the Earth card do all this? And then Kero not only said that it did, but he says that the Earth card itself is very special, and he explains why. Then, according to what Sakura, what she says in her case, once the Earth card's been captured, then that's it. Then, according to her, her destiny will be fulfilled in some way. Then Kero, by accident, just let slip in front of Sakura to say, I wouldn't go past that yet. Now Sakura looked at Kero and had that puzzled look on her face, and she asked the question, What do you mean? But before Kero can explain anything further, that's when the Earth car started attacking again. It created earthquakes and everything else. It damaged all the houses, buildings, and everything else. Now Sakura could tell how powerful the Earth card is, and she was horrified, but in awe. Now worried, according to what Sakura, what she says in her case, that if something isn't done soon, then this could mean a serious problem, and that the Earth's power continues to go stronger and stronger, and things will get worse and worse by the minute. So Kiro continues to explain what the Earth card did and is the fourth element and etc. But Sakura had this funny notion that she didn't feel a thing. So even though Kiro agrees and then tells Sakura, well, most of the elements are elusive in a way, which is why up until moments ago, that's why Earth was very difficult to sense, which is why she just moments ago had just felt it. So when Sakura was asking Kiro what's she gonna do about it, well, Kiro says all you have to do is just discover the Earth's true form. That's all you can do. And that's when, before long, she finally sees it. So good news for Sakura now that she found the Earth's form and she made it to the roof of the building. I'm not sure which. The first thing she did was to use the water card to get his head chopped off. Well, it worked for a while, but then the head grew back. So good news for Kiro and Sakura. Long story short, they managed to get away. I'm not sure how they did it. And that's when Kiro gave her the bad news that you cannot just defeat Earth with any attack card that comes across. Then what can I do? Sakura asked. Well, the way I figure it, since you cannot overpower it, Kiro says, all you need is a card that's never let you down before. So Sakura had finally agreed with Kiro's plan, and that's when she says, okay. And that's when the Earth card's form appeared again. So she knows what to do. The first thing she did was to use the jump card to get away. So that's what she did. So with the jump card, that's when Sakura saw a bunch of trees from up above. And there's something weird about them. They're not moving. And she couldn't help but wonder why. Then Sakura also saw her best friend Madison, Lee, Julian, who's asleep on the bench at the moment, and Miss Mackenzie. So, Miss Mackenzie tells Sakura, open your mind. Strength comes in many forms, and I guess she wasn't kidding when she said that. So back with Sakura and Kiro after she discovered there's a bunch of trees and they're not moving anywhere. And she had this thought that maybe she has an idea somehow on how to defeat the Earth card's form before it did any more damage than it already did. So Sakura had a thought that the reason why the trees are not moving anywhere is because its roots were anchored to the earth. And that's when, thanks to a bunch of trees, aha, Sakura has an idea, a plan, if you will. So after jumping back, that's when Kira says, whoa, wait a minute, what are you doing? Well, according to Sakura, to what she says in her case, she has an idea, a plan, if you will. So Kiro asked her, are you sure about this? Because there's not a lot of time. Then Sakura says in her case to Kiro that the wood card has never failed her before. On the contrary, it did. But she didn't tell him that. But other than that, she says that the wood card will work and then tells Kiro that he should trust her on it. So Kiro agrees with Sakura's idea and to be certain that the plan will work. So guess what she did? She, as I said before, uses the wood card, the same card that was used back in Penguin Park in episode 5, just within the last season, of course. So when the woods card appeared, thanks to Sakura's wand, it does what it knows best. Uses its branches and trees and wraps it around the Earth's card's form. It was crazy, but lo and behold, Sakura's plan worked. So back with Sakura, now that she's down on the ground and intact, even Kero was impressed to see that Sakura plan worked. But now here comes a problem. The Earth card's form is escaping, so now all she has to do is to seal the Earth card. And so coincidentally, that's what she did. And so by surprise, now that the Earth card is caught, not only is the fourth element on Sakura's card list, but it became her 40th card on her list. And let's not forget about Lee, he still has 7 cards on his list. But wait, something else happens. When Sakura captures the Earth card, Kero started to glow. So you know what this means. Now that the Earth card is caught, he begins to change. So, by surprise, Kero has changed into his earthly form, but only different. It has bigger wings, bigger claws, bigger paws, and everything else. And he looked great. Sakura was in shock. She just couldn't believe it. Kero has changed into his earthly form. But at first she doesn't recognize him. But she wanted to know. Kero, is it you? She asked. So Kero says that yes, that he is. Sakura was in awe. And then also as this is what you really look like in your earthly form? Again, Kero says yes. So he confessed to her that thanks to her capturing the Earth card, he became his earthly form. Sakura was amazed and said, "Wow." Next thing that Kero did was to apologize to Sakura. When Sakura asked him why, he regrettably said that he could have helped her a lot more than when she's needed. But he couldn't because he says that unless the Earth card was caught, and now that it did, his powers are restored. Well, to make Hero feel better, that's when Sakura assured him that he did help her along the way. Then she also made a compliment to say, without you, I could never have made it this far, and things could never have been possible, and she's not kidding. Then Kiro told Sakura, although the accomplishment of support that was needed, he says, I'll be with you no matter what. And Sakura couldn't help but wonder, what am I prepared for? And why? Then Kiro just let something slip to Sakura that there's a final test coming up and she should be prepared and she should be ready. So it is now nighttime, and when Sakura came back to join up with her best friend Madison, Lee, Miss Mackenzie, and of course Julian, who are unfortunately still asleep at the moment. So not only are her friends glad to see that she's okay, but Sakura, even better, has some good news. She told her best friend Madison and Lee that she had captured the Earth card. And what's even more better is that they saw Kiro, who also shows up to show them his earthly form. Now that's something. So later, back with Lee, now in his green battle suit, and let's not forget Sakura, just like in her dreams, and back in part one, as I mentioned before, just like what her doll had, she's now in her pink battle suit, and they were looking at Kiro and sensed that something was off. And that's when Lee suspected that Kiro doesn't look happy at all. And of course, even though Sakura agrees that something was off with him, and yet she explains why, because she says that he's getting worried. Just out of curiosity, Sakura wanted to know from Lee who Yue was. Well, he said that Yue is the guardian of the book as well as Kiro was. So Lee told Sakura that Cloud Reed centuries ago before he passed away, he didn't have just one guardian of the book, but two. So Lee continues to explain that one was Kiro Barrows, the guardian beast of the seal, the one that Sakura had just met, and the other was Yue. And, a, and according to Lee, what he says in his case, Yue is a judge and is powered by the moon. And of course, Kiro Also, what Lee says in his case is guarded by the sun. Sakura is really confused and then asks Lee, who is UA judging and for what? But Lee tells her that he isn't sure. So, flashback, according to Lee, what he says in his case, the Cloud Reed, before he passed away, not only created the card book, but all the other books as well. Then back to the present. But according to what Lee says, there's only one problem. None of the books has any records of UA whatsoever. Then he asks Sakura a question. You do have the Cloud book, right? Then, in omission by confession, Sakura not only said to Lee that she does, and then he told her something that she's never known before. He said on the front of the book, that's Kero Barrels, the guardian beast of the seal. And then last but not least, on the back, we have Yue. Now the back side of the book is what Sakura didn't realize and didn't notice. And then before you know it, Sakura has a hunch. She told Lee that Kiro must be waiting for Yue to show up somehow. So Lee, after he learned this from Sakura, he said, really? He is? After Lee had this thought and then suspected that what Sakura said is true, then he says, if that's the case, then that means Yue's going to show his true self at any time. Then Lee also said it'll be just like what Kiro did. Then Sakura and Lee was looking at Miss Mackenzie and Kiro. Then Sakura had a suspicious thought on her mind and then asked herself, is Miss Mackenzie Yue, the one that Kiro had prophesied? But then she heard the voice of her best friend Madison to say, hey Sakura, have you signed the Earth card yet? So Madison, when she approached Sakura, she asked again, and that's when Sakura realized, oh my goodness, and then she says, I haven't signed it yet. So Madison wanted to know, can I get it on tape so that you can sign the Earth card? Of course you can, Sakura said. But before that could happen, that's when Kiro tells her, once the cards have been signed, then you'll know that all of the cards you captured have been sealed, Kiro said. Okay, Sakura says, because she happens to agree with him. And that's when he tells her one last message. You must be prepared for anything, especially when a final judgment is coming, he said. Sakura in shock just couldn't believe what she heard. She says, what? Then Sakura looks at Miss Mackenzie again, and she now is confused and horrified. What did they mean by the final judgment? What is it? Sakura thought. Now Lee wants to know what was going on with her. What's the matter, Sakura? Lee asked. And then Sakura just dismisses it and then said, oh, nothing. So Sakura says, I'll go ahead and sign it. And so she did. And witnessing it was Madison, and she got it all on video camera. So Madison has her turn to ask a question. You do have 40 cards, right? Not only did Sakura said yes that she does, but also Lee has 7 cards on his list. So after Madison has her turn to ask a question, but there's another. She says if Lee and Sakura had all of them, what's going to happen next? Don't worry, Madison, Kiro says. I'm sure you'll find out sooner or later. So finally, Sakura signs the Earth card, just like what Kiro said to do. And then before you know it, long story short, after the strange wind is blowing, so you know what this means, that's when Miss Mackenzie has her turn to say, they're here now, but who is they? Then Sakura also heard from Miss Mackenzie, it's time. But Sakura had a thought, time for what? And then she remembered the radio tower that she had seen 3 times before, and it's the same radio tower that she's been dreaming about. And Sakura couldn't help but what's going in her head. As the wind continues to blow, she couldn't help but think to herself, what is going on here? So back with Julian, who was sleeping at the moment, and I told you we'd get back to him later, he started to glow and levitate. Sakura and Lee couldn't believe what they were about to witness, and what they saw next was unbelievable. He too began to change, just like what Kero did. So back with Sakura, she was surprisingly shocked. She just couldn't believe it. Well, I guess Lee was wrong about Miss Mackenzie. She's not the mysterious UA that Kiro had prophesied. So you know what this means. It was Sakura's brother's best friend, Julian. He's the mysterious UA. So it's just like what the Light and Dark card said back in episode 7, that he has been with Sakura all along. Sakura should have known, but she couldn't help but think to herself, why Julian? But that's not all. Just like what Sakura's been dreaming about back at the Avalon residence in part 1, Yue was the mysterious figure with wings. So it's just like what Sakura had predicted all along. But she couldn't help but wonder, why has this always had to be a secret if Julian was Yue all along? Still, Sakura was confused. She has no idea what to make of it. At first, Sakura didn't even recognize Yue until now, when Kiro told her who it was. So when Kiro says, Sakura, meet Yue. And that's when she should have known. So long story short, after that flashback she had back in episode 7 of what the Dark and Light cards had said to her and what's to come, that's when they knew. They mentioned Yue to her, and now she had witnessed that it was her brother's best friend, Julian. Emotionally, Sakura just couldn't control her feelings anymore. So the first thing that Sakura says, so it was you. But I don't get it. I don't understand, she said. So when Sakura was asking where Julian is and what had happened, that's when Miss Mackenzie let slip to Sakura that back in part 1, he was there at the archery competition just like she did. And that's why he distracted her. That cost her the shot. That's why she missed. And she knew all along that Julian isn't what he seemed to be. So she knew that Julian was Yue. Still, Sakura couldn't believe it. She's like, what? Then Yue looks at Kiro and then says, it's been a long time. We have finally met. I'm glad to hear it, Kiro says, because I felt that same way too. It has been a long time because, according to Kiro, he happens to agree with Yue. Then Yue pleaded his case to Kiro to say how careless he was for letting the cards escape, by accident, of course. Perhaps so, Kiro said. Then Kiro pleaded his case to say nothing happens by accidents because, as he says, he knows as well as Yue does. Then, as Kiro says in his case, that he knew that Yue was close the moment that he arrived. Then Kiro says that he's been preparing for an event just like this. Then Sakura, who was still confused, and then asked why didn't Julian tell her sooner and why the big secret? Then Kiro just left slip to Sakura and Lee to say that Yue has kept his true identity for a long time. So in other words, there was no way that Julian could never have known anything about it just up until now. Then Kiro looks at Miss Mackenzie and said, true, you do have magical powers as well. But then he suspected that there was no way that she could have been Yue because although he does agree that she does help out Sakura along the way. Kiro also has no doubt in mind that although Sakura did agree, that Ms. Mackenzie gave her the guidance that she needed. Still looking at Ms. Mackenzie, that's when Kiro says that it's against the rules for judges to guide their candidates. But on the other hand, that's when he wanted to know from her if she knew that Julian was Yue all along, and then asked, did you? Then Miss Mackenzie had a thought about what Kiro just said, And then, in omission by confession, she just said that she knew. Then Sakura ran up to Kero and, of course, Miss Mackenzie, and she says, "Whoa, wait a minute. Back up." Then she says, "I don't understand." And then Sakura wanted to know from Miss Mackenzie, what did she know about Julian that Sakura herself doesn't, just till now? Then Yue approached Sakura, and then it's his turn to plead his case towards her to say, by asking the question, that I'm just like Hero Barrels? Then, in omission by confession, that's when Yue says that without his powers alone, there is no way that he can return from his earthly form otherwise. Then Madison, who's Sakura's best friend, has her turn to plead her case to say, "Then you mean—" "Yep," Lee says, "you guessed it. Julian, in no doubt of mine, is indeed the second guardian, Yue himself." Well, that's because Madison is just as confused as Sakura was. So back with Yue, who approached Sakura and says, "So, we finally met face to face." And he's not kidding. Then Yue started pleading a case to say how Sakura became a candidate and that she was chosen by Kero Barrels and etc. And of course, once again, Yue's not wrong. But then he says, "Wait a minute. There was someone else that is the candidate as well." And then he approaches to Lee. So after Yue pleaded his case to say that there's no candidate that's going to collect all the cards at once and to pass out the final judgment itself, well, Kiro does agree that Sakura has learned a lot along the way and that she will pull this one off. Then Kiro also says that he has faith in Sakura all the way and that he believed in her. Then Yue looks at Kiro and says, "I can see that you are so positive about this. You are so sure of this." "I agree," Kiro says, "because as tradition holds that the final judgment belongs to you," Kiro said. Then Yue, after he thought about what Kiro said, and it is absolutely true, then he says, "You have a point, and since that's the case, then so be it." So finally, at long last, Yue said, "Then let the final judgment begin." So you know what this means. It's time for Yue to choose one of the candidates, Sakura or Li. But before that can happen, that's when down below, while Yue was flying up to the radio tower, and that's when she says, "Wait a minute, the cars have been captured, right?" That was a question. Then Sakura pleaded her case to say, "Lee and I did what we were supposed to do. We caught all the cards," and that is indeed true. "So what's going on?" Sakura asked. "What is the final judgment anyway?" At first Kiro said absolutely nothing, but then said to Sakura only two words, "Be patient." So back with Yue still flying up, and that's when he said, "Come forward." So you know what this means. Lee became his first opponent. And so he was mesmerized. Sakura panicked and said, "Lee, come back!" Because she was horribly distraught. She had no idea what is going on. So back with Lee, who is now on the roof, he's now face to face with Yue. And he has no idea of what to make of it. So the first thing Yue did was to approach Lee and then introduced himself. And then he said that he's the judge and the final judgment belongs to him and etc. So long story short, after Yue tells Lee that he's allowed to use 7 cards in his possession and etc., then back with Sakura, after she saw what had happened to Lee, she tried to save him as any desperate person would do, but she couldn't because some kind of a force has blocked her. She don't know what to do. She was terrified. So when Kiro saw what Sakura was doing, she says, "Help him! Do something!" But he can't because he just made a confession with Sakura. He says, "I'm afraid no one's going to help him now," he said. So back with Lee still on the roof and along with Yue, he continues to battle him, Lee that is, the best way he knew how, in many ways that he possibly could. And the battle just goes on and on and on and on until finally that's when Lee came up with an idea. In order to defeat Yue, he used one of the seven cards that he had. So the first thing he did was to use the time card, which he thought it was a good idea at the time. So, long story short, Lee used the time card, and when he did, everything froze into time. Well, except for Yue, of course, who was flying right next to him. So, what did Yue do? He uses his power of time against Lee, and he told him, "I'm sorry, but this is it for you." So, long story short, back with Sakura down below, after she heard Lee scream, so you know what this means, Lee has completely failed the final judgment against Yue. So when Yue sent Lee down below, and when Sakura ran up to him, she asked if he was okay. Well, good news, he's fine, but bad news, he lost all his seven cards at once. Lee, that is. So when Sakura's best friend Madison, along with Miss Mackenzie, had arrived on the scene and along with Kero, that's when the reason why he lost all the seven cards is because Lee had just confessed that Yue took them. Then Lee gives Sakura some advice the best way he knew how. He says, "Please be careful." And then he also said, "Yue is very powerful, and he's not kidding." So back with Yue still flying in the air, he says, "Well, the next candidate step forward." So you know what this means. Just like what Lee did, Sakura became mesmerized. And just like what Lee did, Sakura's now on the same roof as Lee once did. And she too was face to face with Yue, just like what Lee did. But unlike what Lee did, she's on the roof of a building, and she was staring at the radio tower, just like what she was dreaming about. The next thing that Sakura did was to look at Yue, who was flying up in the moonlight in the sky. And he's the mysterious figure with wings, just like in Sakura's dreams. But that's not all. So back with Sakura in the present, she started putting two and two together. That what she was dreaming about is about to come true. Just like what she was dreaming about. The rail tower, Miss Mackenzie, Yue, it all made sense. But before Sakura can take her turn, the first thing that Yue said was to command the cards of Cloud to command him. The next thing he said is that Kero Barrels has chosen Sakura to be his master or mistress, whichever the case. Then suddenly Sakura's staff begins to glow. And the last thing that Yue said was that whatever Sakura is fit to be his master or mistress, whichever the case, will be chosen by Yue himself. And he's not kidding, so uh-oh. That means that everything that Sakura had dreamt for the last two seasons has finally come true. But now here comes the big question. Will she pass the final judgment? But what would happen if she doesn't? Well, we're about to find out, but right now that's the end of part 2 and episode 10.